My next guest is Laura Reber. She is a school psychologist who created an online special education tutoring company called Progress Parade. After seeing how many students in special education struggle to get what they need and how many special education teachers struggle to meet the needs of all their students, she was excited to be able to provide a space where special educators can do what they were trained to do and students can get what they really need. And she also has a BS in psychology from Truman State University and a specialist in school psychology from Illinois State University. And her company, Progress Parade, also is a team of school psychologists and specialized teachers that create personalized approaches for homework support, academic intervention, homeschooling, unschooling, and more. Welcome to the podcast, Laura.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, tell me about a time when you were in the trenches and managed to crawl out.
Sure, definitely. I'd say the time that I was in the trenches was probably, in my first district as a school psychologist, kind of straight out of grad school. I was really excited to bring all of the different training and skills that I had. Many people don't know this, but school psychologists do receive training in academic intervention. And I know everybody knows about the assessment piece that we do, but all the social emotional intervention. I was just excited to bring all those different skills in. And I didn't understand that I was just going to be expected to test all day.
Yeah.
And, so really in those first couple of years, I did a lot of testing, which is an important part of our jobs. I'm not trying to diminish that, but I was really excited to just have time to provide social emotional intervention, academic intervention, and consultation to students. And just found myself kind of spread thin between too many different buildings, doing testing all day long and not really being able to build those relationships with teachers and with students that I was really passionate about. So that's when I started to kind of explore, well, how can I actually, for me in grad school, my favorite thing I learned was academic intervention. So I was like, how can I find more opportunities to do academic intervention with students? Because that's what I'm really passionate about. And so that's why I started to explore something like Progress Parade, which I know we might talk a little bit about more. But yeah, the in the trenches experience for me was really being spread too thin. Like I know many people in education are, not really having anybody know who I was in any of my buildings, because I was just kind of doing constant testing of students. So I know many school psychologists do have that experience too.
Yeah, and that's so unfortunate. Like, that. And I know like school counselors as well, they're doing so much scheduling, right? And that's not what they really signed up for, right? That's not like what they went to school for. And, I understand just like your excitement about being able to do some parts of the job, but then there's those parts that aren't exactly the most, enjoyable or, what you went to school for. But, tell me a little bit about Progress Parade and how you got that started and kind of if you've seen an uptick in use during the pandemic and what, if people wanted to look into using Progress Parade, what they could expect.
Sure. Yeah. So I got excited about Progress Parade because of, really wanting to do the academic intervention. That was always my passion, is designing high quality academic instruction that's designed around the student, specifically for the student. I know both teachers and students often have the experience in a school setting that they're just spread too thin. There's too many different, especially in special education, there's too many different needs packed together in the same hour because that's what works logistically for the school. But a lot of times that doesn't lead to the best outcomes for anybody, really. So in Progress Parade, we do provide one-on-one support. We always match the student with a specific teacher who's got the background and what they need. So it does really provide teachers with the opportunity to really do what's in their wheelhouse and do what were trained and excited to do, to have we have some teachers on our team who are trained in Norton Gillingham and Wilson, others who love executive functioning coaching at the high school level, others who love math. So we're really just able to say, this is what you love to do. Let's give you those students and let's let you work one-on-one with the type of student you love. And that really benefits everybody. It obviously benefits the teachers, but the students as well, because they get a passionate, excited teacher who's 100% dedicated to them every instructional minute. So, that's what we're all about. And everybody can find us at progressparade.com if they wanted to learn more information about that.
And in terms of just this past school year, did you see a huge uptick in people wanting to, find out what your company was all about?
Yeah, definitely. There's been a big increase in attention and interest.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of been like for many companies and many people, a roller coaster of a year. At first,
Yeah.
everybody was like, I think we'll just pause for now while we're figuring things out for this like 2 weeks that the country is going to experience this pandemic, because at first everybody was like, oh, things are just closed for 2 weeks. And then people started to figure out, okay, it's going to be much longer than that. But so when people realized that, there was kind of a steady increase in need for our services. So yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I can definitely see that as something people are looking at. And also, as schools go back, quote unquote, to normal, there's a lot of kids who maybe didn't get the interventions this past year if they were remote or hybrid, and that they'll want to use Progress Parade for that extra piece, right? That they feel like the district might not be providing. But that kind of ties in to, let's talk a little bit about special education in general. And I know a lot of listeners, have been in the classroom, and there might be a few that haven't really had students with IEPs and 504s, or, they're not quite sure what the difference is between an IEP and a 504. So walk me a little bit through that.
Sure. Yeah, that's a common experience. I mean, even, we talk to parents every day, and a lot of times even a parent who has a student with the 504 plan or IEP doesn't know the difference. It hasn't really been explained to them. So happy to talk about that. So it is a little bit confusing. So essentially some commonalities are to qualify for a IEP or 504 plan, but you need to have a disability. The student needs to have a disability. So, common examples of disability that I work with are students with ADHD, students with learning disabilities, students with like emotional, they call it emotional disturbance, which I think is a bit of an antiquated term, but anyway, that's the qualification, emotional challenges, which the label is emotional disturbance under IDEA, which is the Disabilities Act. And then, other examples that are like kids in wheelchairs, like that's a disability. Obviously physical disabilities are a disability, or students who are deaf or blind. All those are disabilities that would potentially qualify a student to receive specialized support through a 504 plan or IEP, individualized education plan. The difference is really, well, there are a few differences. The main difference is kind of in the level of need. So a 504 plan provides accommodations. So that means that the student is really accessing the same difficulty of curriculum. It's really the same curriculum. It should be the same curriculum. It's just they need some accommodations or slight modifications in order to access the curriculum. So the most concrete example of an accommodation would be like a ramp for a wheelchair. That's obviously a physical accommodation that then kind of quote unquote levels the playing field, like quite literally, and this, it allows them to literally access the building. Less concrete examples of accommodations are, again, not changing the curriculum at all itself, just really providing access to the curriculum, is extended time on tests for students who might have distractibility or need that extended time, preferential seating, so seating students in a place that's going to lead to more success for them if they're distractible, are some really common examples for students with ADHD. Those students often have 504 plans. So kind of to keep it simple, I think the easiest way to think about it is just, it doesn't really modify the curriculum at all. It just accommodates. An individualized education plan is going to modify the curriculum. So, so the student's actually going to get services, not just changes in the curriculum. So common services are academic services, so meeting with a special education teacher, speech services, social work services, occupational therapy services, any kind of really when the student needs a modification to the curriculum or needs some support beyond just a mild change in their environment, that's going to be an IEP instead of a 504 plan. So that's kind of high level. Many people think of it that an IEP, a term that gets thrown around a lot in special education is least restrictive environment. That's a really important term. Least restrictive environment essentially means we want the student to be in the environment that is most like their non-disabled peers or most similar to their non-disabled peers. So a 504 plan is considered more similar to their non-disabled peers. So less of a change, if that makes sense, than an IEP plan.
Yeah, I think that was a good explanation on kind of what those differences are. And I know, so my son has an IEP, and I remember when he did his reevaluation, I think after third grade, we were trying to see, will he be better suited to a 504 or not? And the answer was no. But that is kind of part of my next question. But I first wanted to ask, walk me through a little bit of the identification process. Who's involved in that identification? Could the parents say to the school, my student needs an IEP or 504, or is it usually the school that will say something?
It can be either one. So anybody can request an evaluation. And there are strict timelines that the school does need to respond to that request. They don't need to say yes, but they do need to tell you yes or no. So yes, a parent, I would always recommend if anybody's requesting an evaluation to do so in writing, just because it's been clearly documented that you did it. So yes, I'd say the most common way probably depends on the school district, honestly, and the level of parent and teacher environment and involvement, because that varies widely by school district, but and by individual school, really. But yeah, I'd say probably most common is from the school, is probably how they most commonly get diagnosed. Teachers will notice concerns, if there's some kind of multi-tiered support system in place or response to intervention. Those are the other buzzwords. I don't want to dig too far into the buzzwords, but many times those supports help identify students that might need an IEP, but often parents, teachers do recognize it, but parents can ask for one too. Sometimes if the parent feels that the school is not giving their student what they need, then they will ask for an evaluation directly, and that's their right. And the school does need to respond to that and say why, yes, they'll do the evaluation, or no, they won't. Yeah.
And does that take a while then to get the student on an IEP after the initial identification?
Yeah, so after that request, it can take a few months. I mean, it's a certain number of school days, but I think it's more helpful to think about it in number of months. Most school districts are going to take around 6 to 8 weeks, depending on where the holidays fall and things. It's 60 school days is what they have. So, from that initial, basically from that initial request is, there's a timeline for that they have to respond. And then it can, after they decide, if they do decide to do an evaluation, they do have 60 school days to do it. So it can take a while to actually get services in place.
Okay. And walk me a little bit through what would happen if a parent or even the teacher has a student, just giving an example, my son who has just completed 7th grade, and he's done very well academically second semester because they'd gone back in person, or because of his IEP, he was able to go back 4 days a week when they were only hybrid, and then they went full-time in person in March after spring break. But, he's very, on his goal sheet that I got at the end of the school year, they said he was very resistant to being pulled from class for services from a speech therapist. So at what point would it be appropriate for either an educator to think maybe the student should phase out, or if the student is self-advocating, what kind of is the process there, and what is there testing involved? How would somebody, how would a student be phased out? And, what is the advantage to keeping a student on an IEP through their high school? Or, is it common for a kid to be phased out that had one in elementary and then they get phased out in secondary?
Yeah, I would say, as far as the common question, it's not as common as I would like. I mean, really the idea is that we want students to be phased out. I mean, a lot of times I talk to parents because they want students to get support, which is great. I understand why they want that. And really we want students to be independent. I mean, the goal is for students to be as independent as possible and to need as few services as possible. That goes back to that least restrictive environment term, which is a big term in special education. We want students to be in the environment that's most like their peers that they can thrive in. That's the environment that we want. So you know, as I don't have a percentage on number of students that transition back, but it's not something I've often seen in my in time. I mean, it does happen. It's not like super uncommon, but the majority of students, I would say, do stay on IEPs until they graduate. That being said, if the student doesn't need it, like if, for example, if a teacher is seeing this student is really on grade level with their peers, like all of when they're reading, I don't notice any concerns, you know, for example, if they have a reading disability, then maybe it's time to bring up to the IEP team. So, you know, if you're a teacher, I would say talk to your school psychologist. They're often kind of a key point in the IEP team. Some schools have special education case managers. It kind of depends on how this school is structured. So there might be a special education teacher that's been assigned as a case manager, but talk to somebody in the special education team, a school psychologist or a special education teacher, and say, hey, you know, I'm really seeing that in my classroom, this student is functioning just as well as, you know, the peers. It really doesn't stand, he or she really doesn't stand out to me as needing extra support, because there would be a process. You know, we can't just stop services. We would need to do an evaluation and have the parents consent to stopping services. But it is something that if we're noticing is a benefit to the student to really kind of quote unquote graduate from special education. For students who are starting to resist it, I think that's a candid conversation for parents and students to have. Certainly it's important to listen, to hear them out, you know, on if they think they need it, or, you know, if they're willing to kind of try a trial period, like maybe we can talk to the school and see if we can dial it back, or maybe we can find a different period that's less embarrassing for you to kind of decrease minutes for a while to see how you do without them. I think those are all conversations to have with the IEP team, which is, you know, the IEP team is usually composed, like I said, of special education teacher and any of the other service providers that are involved. So if that's too much information, I think kind of high level, it's good for kids to graduate if they can from special education, to no longer need their IEPs. So if that's something that's possible for a student in your classroom, or, you know, your own student, if you're a parent, then I think it is something great to explore with the IEP team.
Yeah, those are all good, you know, good advice. And the IEP team is there to, you know, support parents. And, you know, usually it's just that 1 or 2 meetings a year. But, you know, I've worked at schools where, you know, there are parents that will contact the IEP team every week. So, you know, and that's, you know, that's their job. They need to support the student and answer parents' questions about what's going on. And that kind of leads into my next question about a student who has diverse learning needs, but also maybe has behavior issues. And so let's say there's a core class, like the language arts class, and there's a teacher who has students with IEPs and, you know, for varying learning needs. And the teacher is using that one size fits all way of handling both the academics and the behavior issues. So what should an administrator maybe do to intervene, or maybe somebody from the IEP team do to intervene in that circumstance, or, you know, counselors? So who should intervene maybe? And then also, you know, what is kind of your experience in seeing students in those circumstances?
Sure. Yeah, it's too bad, you know, that I think that there isn't clear communication with teachers on what supports are available to them. Every school does have a school psychologist assigned to it. So there is always, and there's always special education teachers around. So there is always support, even if they're not visible. Like in my example, many teachers probably didn't even know I was assigned to their school because I was testing kids in so many different schools, but I was. So, like, you know, if an administrator had come to me and said, you know, there's this behavior problem and we need some support, I would have been able to support with that. So I think as a teacher, if your kind of bag of tricks for a behavior problem isn't working, you know, I think many teachers try reward systems, you know, and kind of try reward systems generally, like maybe they're not exactly sure like what behavior They're trying to target with the reward system. They just know they want it to get better, but they're not really understanding why the student is engaging in the behavior they're engaging in. And that's something that a social worker or school psychologist would really be able to help with, kind of analyzing that behavior and saying, okay, we can help figure out why this student is doing what they're doing, and then come up with a plan that really gets at that same why, if that really helps to, because behavior is communication. That's something that people say a lot, and it's 100% true. Behavior is communication. So if a student is engaging in behavior, it's because they're trying to communicate something that they're not, that their words really they haven't developed enough yet to really explain or ask or say what they need. So that's the point of trying to figure out why the student's engaging in the behavior, and then trying to figure out a plan to help that student communicate what they're trying to communicate, or help them get what they need in a more appropriate way. So I would say, and that's another term, if trying to figure out why a student's engaging in what they're doing is called a functional behavior analysis. That's something, that's another buzzword in special education, but it's just a fancy way to say, like, okay, why is the student doing what they're doing? What's the reason? What's the environment around them that we, what can we change in the environment? What can we change in how we respond to the behavior? I think for a teacher who's feeling overwhelmed, it would be great to talk to your administrator. Administrators, sometimes are overwhelmed. So, as a school psychologist in school, I can say, I liked to talk to the teachers about this kind of thing. So, talk to the special education team until you find somebody who's willing to help you. If the administrator doesn't, I think as teachers and really as parents dealing with school districts, we're used to having to be the squeaky wheel sometimes. So, there are supports available though that teachers don't know about. So I think trying to get out there and just get to know the people in your school can help with that a lot. So
yeah, and that's true. That's just knowing the right people, and also not being afraid if you're core or your classroom teacher to communicate with those people who are on the case team, or have that student on their caseload. I wanted to talk a little bit about the learning needs of students with ADHD. Especially now, like going into the post-pandemic educational opportunities. I know there have been students who have functioned way better in the remote setting for those that have ADHD. But like for parents who are kind of wondering if their students should do an online school in the fall or go back to brick and mortar, what are some of your tips in kind of assessing that?
Sure. Yeah. Making that decision, because I know many school districts are still leaving it up to the parents. I would say probably many parents saw how their student did in the last year, and that's a great gauge for what's the right environment. Most students with ADHD probably will do better in person. I would say the majority find the classroom virtual experience, which is different from the one-on-one virtual experience, find the classroom virtual experience distracting. But there are some students who have done better online, and most of those students are usually students who maybe have some social anxiety that can contribute to their distraction, can contribute to their difficulties, so I'd say those students, like if there's some kind of social anxiety piece, like that can be that can be a big part of why they do better online. Also, if they're really distracted by peers and really, and sometimes there's just school environments that students just don't respond well to. Sometimes people have sensory challenges, or, so it can be the lighting, just various environmental things at school that they just weren't responding well to. So some of those kids did really well in online. So I'd say, if you're sitting back thinking this was the best school year of my life, then leave your kid online if you can, if you're like, this school year was torture and I couldn't get my student to focus and engage, then those are the kids that need to go back to school, so kind of reflecting on the previous year will help a lot.
Yeah. That's a good tip for parents. That are just kind of wondering what to do, and just kind of looking at their grades. And looking at, that social interaction, like did they crave the social interaction if they were remote most of the year, et cetera, right? And kind of their goals in the next coming years and their age as well, right? Some young kids can function well online, whereas some older kids might be needing that social interaction in high school. So,
right.
I've learned so much from you about just special education in general and supporting students in and out of the classroom. Out of everything we talked about today, what's one thing in particular you'd like listeners to remember?
Sure. Yeah, I think the most important thing is know that you can reach out to your special education team. And if you've had a bad experience with one member of the special education team, don't let that discourage you from, reaching out to other members. There are many members of the special education team, like I said, the school psychologists, the teachers, the occupational therapists, the speech and the social workers. So lots of different members. And I would say, getting students the right supports goes a very long way towards making them successful in school. So don't hesitate to reach out and make those connections. So you know, when you have a student that's having behavioral academic needs, what you can do.
That's so important to remember. Yeah, just that communication. Where can people connect with you and find you online?
Sure. Yeah. So progressparade.com is our website, and actually all over that homepage, there's book a free consultation, which comes directly to me. So if they wanted to talk to me, they could book a call right there on our homepage and talk to me more, or submit a contact form, either one.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for being on the Out of the Trenches podcast.
Thank you for having me. Thanks so much.